Greetings, this is Elizabeth Creamer. I'm coming to you in a series of videos I'm calling Full Disclosure. I'm coming to you after a 35-year career as an academic, offering some sort of insider tips, mostly about writing and reading. Writing, reading, and reporting, I guess I would say. This particular video is about battling writer's block. I come to it as someone who has always been fascinated with writers and with the writing process. I've read a good bit about writers and the writing process. I myself am a compulsive/obsessive writer. I love to write. I'm one of the rare people that do. I think it's thinking. I love to think. I love to play around with ideas. Writing doesn't ever come easy, I think, to anyone, whether you enjoy it or not. It's a challenging process. What is meant by writer's block? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the definition. I'm going to talk about some strategies at 3 points in the writing process. But I want to say ahead of time, everyone has to figure out their own way, what works for them. What works for one person doesn't work for another. But I'll start out by saying that even the most prolific writers experience writer's block when they can't write, when they're stuck. Some people refer to it as a type of brain freeze. For some people, they're petrified at facing a blank page or a blank screen. Some people find themselves stuck after a page or two. And some people really have difficulty letting that manuscript go and sending it off to an editor or a reviewer. There are a lot of reasons for writer's block. It probably varies by person. It's a crisis of confidence. Even novelists who have written many novels, or people who've written many papers, still experience the same crisis of confidence when they start a manuscript or as they write a manuscript. It's not a feeling that necessarily goes away. For some people, there's the feeling of that editor, that reviewer, that teacher with the red pen. This is the critic that sort of sits at the shoulder and always has sort of negative things to say. Sometimes it's like an internal voice, the critic. For some people, there's a reason for writer's block. It's a chaotic life. The endless interruptions that come to most people's lives that chop time up into such small, tiny bits. So what can we do to combat the paralysis of writer's block that usually comes to everyone at some point in the writing process? Anne Tyler, an American novelist who writes out of Baltimore, wrote 22 novels. And here's what she says. For the first 83 drafts, you pretend that no one is ever going to read. No one is ever going to read it. When I'm working on something, I say to myself, this is just a draft. This is just a draft. You can change it. Get your ideas down. It's just a draft. One of the things to do is to let go of the idea that writing is easy for anyone, even for the people who do a great deal of it. It's not easy. It's hard work. It's solitary work. Accept the idea this is not graduate school. It takes many drafts to produce anything that is good. So for those who are really threatened by the blank screen, that's the first place where you're sort of paralyzed, here are different things that people report works for them. They all won't work for you. Some of them will, some of them don't. Everyone always talks about an outline. What I found in working with a recent book is I would create a tentative outline and then I'd write 3 or 4 sections, put them in a folder on my desktop called sections, and then eventually I'd have about 2/3 of the core ideas written, and then I'd go back and revisit my outline and begin to put it together. Many writers say the second point, that when you're laying out your first draft, you just write it as fast as you can, telling yourself constantly you'll revise it later. So you just try to get your ideas down, knowing that you're going to go back and sweep through it again a couple of times. Another strategy that some people do, take an index card, a sheet of paper. You start with a word. What's your main point? Go to the title. Then write a sentence saying, this is my main thesis, the main argument. And then under that, put bullet 1, bullet 2, bullet 3, maybe 4. Don't exaggerate how much you can accomplish in a single article. I have also found this last one works pretty well for me too. If I've written about something before and I'm trying to build my ideas, I never reproduce them. I go through articles, I highlight ideas that I want to build, I cut and paste those into a document. They're all relevant to that topic, and then I see how I can build on those. Some people find that when they run into trouble is when the manuscript, maybe you've got 5 pages or 10 pages, you've written a brilliant introduction. You thought you knew where you were going, but you get stuck. When you get stuck, it's a signal that something is not working. And the best thing to do when you're stuck is to walk away from it. It's not working. Do something that's sort of mindless. I said, take a walk, do the wash. One thing that I found is amazingly true. It works for me. I've heard other people say it works for them. Say to yourself, I'll think about that. I'll think about that. Sometimes the next morning before my feet hit the ground, I'll have a solution. Sometimes I find, nope, that section doesn't fit. It's not going to work. I may have spent 2 days on it, but I'm going to have to put it in the unused folder. If you're stuck in the middle of a manuscript, another way to do is read something new or unfamiliar that's related. I always get ideas from reading. Most writers go back and forth between reading and writing. Agree to review a manuscript. If you're lucky, there'll be some new ideas in it. A third or fourth one in this list, when you're frozen, set very modest goals for the day. I can imagine about 3 paragraphs at a time. I can imagine about a section at a time. I can hold that in my mind. Paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3. That may not be my goal for the day. I've set a modest goal, feel like I've made some progress. If I'm really stuck, I work on mindless things, like the reference list. You can always work on the reference list. The last point about keeping a manuscript going is finding a way to keep track of ideas as they occur to you. Sometimes I put them in the comments, but I don't like that because it clutters up your manuscript, and I'm always afraid they'll be stuck there when I submit it. I am constantly jotting notes. I store notes. I have a system for keeping track of notes. I use note cards, and I have elaborate note card systems. So you have to find a way that works for you. The final step is surprising, is letting a manuscript go. To me, a manuscript is never finished. I always feel like I could improve it. I always have other ideas I want to weave in, but they don't fit. And generally, I have to force myself to stop. So you have to sort of get some distance from it. You let it get cold. I stop reading, so I'm not getting a lot of new ideas. I recognize I have ideas that I haven't been able to use. And then you set the manuscript aside for a couple of weeks. This is a good strategy as long as you're not a deadline pusher. So you put it aside for a couple of weeks because you need some distance before you do that final draft. Recognize that an article in our world, in the social science world, is a whole lot shorter by the time you lay out the need and the methods and all those other required things. You never get to say quite as much as you hope. Always save some ideas for your next paper. So I've told you a little bit about how I do it, how others do it. I want to come back to the point. It's not surprising that you have a crisis of confidence. Most people do as they write. They just continue to feel inadequate. They have a hard time reading what they've written once they've published it. These all go surprisingly with the writing practice. So I've wrapped this up. I want to tell you that the planned 5 videos in this first phase. This is just me sort of having fun, sharing insights I've gained over the years. So this is the third. You can see the first one was about being strategic about citing practices. This is sort of proposing an activist agenda. 2 was how to avoid self-plagiarism, violating copyright that way. This one was writer's block. The next one is going to be about writing an article for a methodological journal. And finally, number 5 in this series, I'm not sure what it's going to be. What does it take to be a prolific writer? That interests me. How do you get organized to write? That interests me. How do you demonstrate originality as you write? That interests me as well. So I hope this is helpful to you. I hope you'll leave feedback in the YouTubes where I'm putting some of these, or in academia saying, oh yes, this worked for me. Share that with others as well.